Good morning, everyone, and welcome to episode 58 of Saved You a Seat. And today we are going to be talking about AI in the title industry, which is a pretty hot topic. And we have compiled a great group of panelists that have some really insightful things to share with you today. And as this is not my area of forte, I'm just going to actually listen along with you and turn it over to Gorkem from SoftPro here in a minute. But before we dive in, I wanted to just review that we will be sending out a follow-up email as we do every episode. We will include a link to our blog, which will house the recording that if you want to go back and listen or share the recording, you can. So that usually goes out a day or two after. So just give us some time. It might be next week since we're having it on Thursday today instead of Tuesday. But you will get a follow-up email covering everything we've covered and a link to the actual recording. We do encourage questions. You can use the feature here in GoToWebinar. You should have a feature option somewhere on your screen. Everyone's setup is a little bit different, but feel free to go ahead and click on that and type your question, and we will try and get to as many as we can. If by chance we don't get to your question, we will try and reach out offline and not leave you hanging. And if we think it's something super pertinent, then we will go ahead and put it out there in the follow-up email as well. So another thing we're doing for customer appreciation, we are going to randomly select one of the attendees for today's webinar, and the prize is fantastic, probably one of the best ones to date. It is a registration to our SoftPro User Group Conference, which will be held in the spring in Nashville, Tennessee. So one person will getting that fun email and letting them know what they've won and all the information. So look forward to that. And I think that's it. I don't really want to take up a ton of time. I really want to let these panelists talk and share their information. So Gorkem, I'm going to mute myself. And like I mentioned, if you have any questions, there's a questions feature that you can go ahead and type them in. And other than that, take it away, Gorkem.
Thank you very much, Leslie. And good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. Welcome to our panel on AI and the title industry. I'm Gorkem. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for SoftPro. But thankfully, I will not be doing most of the talking. I'll be doing the question now. So the purpose of the panel is to discuss the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning-based technologies in your business in title settlement. And we assembled a great group of panelists that I'll introduce here shortly, who will share with us their views on some prepared questions we have. We also have a couple of poll questions for the audience so that our panelists can get to know you a little bit better. So I'm going to launch the first one right now. So please answer as you can as we continue with introductions. Our panelists, I will start with Dominic Fade. He goes by Dom. He's the Director of Artificial Intelligence Solutions for FNF. We have Jason Nadeau. He does go by Jason. He's our Chief Digital AI Officer. And last but not least, we have Mr. Diamond Rick. He's the Vice President of IT for FNF Agency. And they have engaged with these technologies, not just on behalf of FNF, but for all our agency customers and users. So they will be bringing us a variety of perspectives on how some of these technologies work, what you could do with them, and what to look out for. So with that, let's start with the first question. And this one, Rick, will start with you, and then we'll open the discussion for the rest of the panelists. What are the most promising areas in which generative AI can be used in title insurance and settlement? And how does one get started?
All right, so from the agency perspective, when you're talking about title agents or attorneys, I think there are three main areas that a title agent can use to take advantage of artificial intelligence. One is marketing, especially what's going on these days in a slower market. Now is not the time to bury your heads in the sand. Now is the time to engage. And what do we do in the down market? We try to grab market share. Well, how do we do that? It's by better marketing. It's by engaging with our customers. And I think the use of generative AI, used correctly, can really help in that area. Certainly with the smaller to mid-size agents that may not have a marketing department, you can use these technologies to help somebody in your office to start creating better marketing materials and figure out better ways to engage with customers, with real estate brokers, with lenders. The second avenue, I think, that artificial intelligence can really help a title agent is in communication. So there's always communication going back and forth between the buyer and the seller. Certainly the real estate broker wants to know what's going on, and it creates a tremendous amount of phone calls and I don't want to say time wasters, but it takes away from being actually able to do the job properly. So using AI with a product like, for example, Alana, that allows you to answer questions via text, and giving answers and sending that information to the people involved, and not being able to, or not having to answer all those phone calls. Certainly these days, with the younger crowd, they want instant gratification. They want information at their fingertips very quickly. So they communicate by text. They don't want to pick up the phone. They don't want to send an email. It's a great time saver and a great way to get information quickly to the people that are asking. And I think the third area that makes a lot of sense when using AI is back-end processing. So another thing that you should be doing when business is slow is looking at your back-end processes. How can I streamline them? How can I make them more efficient? How can I save some time and save some money? There are platforms out there that can help you in things like post-closing to make that process a little bit more efficient, a little more quicker. Everybody hates post-closing. Policy typing, repetitive tasks that everybody are answering or everybody's doing on the back end. You can now take that time, take those people, and get those repetitive tasks off their plates, and hopefully focus them on other things, which in the whole scheme of things now is generating more business. Gorkem, does that give you enough of an answer there?
Rick, I think those are three great points. And to just touch on a couple of specific examples, if you haven't already, these Gen AI tools are worth trying out, and many times they are free. We'll talk about some of the risks of using the free versions a little bit later, but some of these tools specifically are like ChatGPT, Microsoft Copilot, and Google has their own version of Chat too. And to touch on some of Rick's examples, if you're stuck and you want to brainstorm with one of these tools, open it up and ask, like, what are some marketing ideas that our sales team can do for the fall season? Brainstorm 10 ideas around realtors and in an environment where interest rates are decreasing. And these systems are really good at brainstorming. You're not going to want to make risk underwriting decisions based on the output, given some of the challenges we'll talk about later. But it's really good at this creative ideas, creative writing. As Rick mentioned, like specific examples, like saying, write me copy for a blog post about this topic. And you can iterate back and forth on some of these ideas. So I think it's really powerful. And as a tool, I would encourage us all to think about using one of these to spur your ideas and creations as like a first step. In the way that we used to turn to Google to look for information first, maybe when you're doing creative type tasks, you check with a Gen AI type tool like ChatGPT.
The other thing I wanted to throw in there as well, and thank you for that, Dom, is fraud detection. Certainly with the advent of AI, we know that the fraudsters are using that technology, not only to brute force passwords and things like that, but there are great ways through identity verification to be able to use AI in red flagging possible fraudulent transactions as well. So I think that's another area that AI can really help our title agents and certainly this industry.
And moving on, so in these specific areas, or maybe ones that were not mentioned yet, what exciting or new projects you are working on? Dom, we'll start with you. And our audience is about 50% settlement, closing professionals, and about 32% title, with some sales and technology thrown in case you want to talk specifically about the settlement area.
Yeah, I wanted to highlight a couple, and I'm sure others will be able to share other examples, but there's a couple of exciting projects that are happening out in the wild. And one that folks might be aware of is what's called advanced voice mode. ChatGPT has this, or OpenAI. Google also has one, and Microsoft does too. And this is a tool where you can have a back and forth conversation that is fluid and not really constrained in like the Siri or the Alexa world that we live in today. And some ways in which you might be able to use this type of tool in our business is you could say to the app, "Hey, I'm about to go meet with the number one realtor in my market. I'm going to give you my elevator pitch, why she should use us for her business and title insurance, and I want you to review that pitch." And the system will listen and give you an intelligent response. Or I'm about to be on a panel. Here's some questions and responses that I may get, and critique me. And it does a really good job of giving critiques and helping you craft your message. So that's one example. And then another example that's recently caught fire on the internet is a project from Google called Notebook LM. This has the ability to upload various data types, whether it's PDF documents, YouTube videos, or others, and be able to ask for summaries of those documents. What distinguishes this tool is it does it very intelligently, and you can, today in its current format, you can upload like 50 different documents. I actually uploaded the New Jersey Title Insurance Handbook that is something like 2,000 pages long, and was able to chat with that and ask questions like, what's the most common form of deed in New Jersey? And it was able to give me the answer, and not only that, but cite the page and paragraph of where this this answer came from. The really cool feature that Notebook LM also has is it can create 100% generated podcast that's totally dynamic, where there'll be two different speakers going back and forth, giving a 10-minute conversation about the data source. So if you're a busy escrow officer or a busy title person and you didn't have a chance to read the bulletin from the underwriter, you could literally throw it into this Notebook LM and have it generate an audio that you could listen to as you're walking the dog in the morning or something. And it makes an interesting back and forth over dry topics at times. So that's a couple interesting areas.
Yeah, those are some fun ones. Those are fun ones, Dom. A couple other things we're working on. I'll talk to you guys a little bit about a couple practical things and a few things we got going in the lab. Dom talked about it when you think about from a sales standpoint, and he talked about how in the past you would Google something, and now maybe if you're trying to do something creative, you AI something or whatever the new Google term is going to be. I was talking with one of our sales managers the other day, and they shared with me a really interesting use case. And they said, before I go into a meeting with customers, especially if in this case, if it's a lender or a bank, I will go to a Copilot or a ChatGPT, and I will say, I'm going into a meeting. I'm going to be meeting with a loan officer. I'm meeting with Dominic Fahey. He works for US Bank. He works in the Albuquerque area. Can you give me a little background about Dominic? Can you give me a little background about his company? And can you give me like 3 topics that would be good to talk about relative to real estate and title insurance and such? And not only does it do a good job of searching the internet for you and finding out things like, oh, they had a record year, or they just opened a new branch somewhere, or the types of things you would find on the web as news, it incorporates them and can help you provide talking points in the script and that kind of stuff. So it's kind of like Internet Research Plus that I think is really helpful for a lot of folks. So that's just a tip I would throw out there that I'm seeing some of our folks do that is super helpful. And then in the lab, some of the things that we're doing R&D on, for all of you who know and love SoftPro, we obviously are big users of SoftPro throughout all of our operations. Our agents use them, and we're here with our SoftPro team. We have been doing some lab work with AI, interacting with notes and emails and comments and such inside of SoftPro to allow you to potentially in the future, we're very hopeful, interact with the SoftPro system via an AI application. So the idea of being able to ask SoftPro, maybe even via the advanced voice that Dom was talking about, right? We are really hopeful that there's a world where, on your SoftPro ribbon, you have an Ask SoftPro button, and you can click on it and say, where am I at with earnest money? Or has the closing date changed and such? And have it be able to interact with the data and the notes and stuff that you have in the system to answer those types of questions. We've been working on that stuff here in the lab at SoftPro, and some really encouraging and fun results so far. I think that there's definitely a future where that's part of the experience of working with the SoftPro platform.
That would be very cool if it were available today. It's not.
Not yet. We're a little early. The AI is not quite ready for all the primetime things we want to do with it, for sure.
So a couple of questions came from the audience tied to these replies, so I'll just kind of inject them here. Don, one is, are we going to receive the sites you mentioned after the vetting?
Yeah,
in some fashion on the blog.
Yeah.
This blog.
For sure.
And the second one is, if we are, for example, for things like Notebook LM, if we put our underwriter bulletins in there that are not public information, really, are we violating our agreements with our underwriters? And so, just so you know, 82% of our audience is an independent title or some agent firm.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I think Gorkem, it kind of brings us into some of the risks with using these tools. And I know that we had a future question about this, but I think it's a perfect opportunity to talk about it.
Absolutely.
As with anything on the internet, oftentimes when it's a free service, the provider is giving that free service in order to get your data, and if it's free, you're the product. And so I think, Jason, you have often said, don't type anything in the internet that you wouldn't want the world to see.
Right.
And this falls into that penumbrum too. Especially if it's a free tool, you want to inspect and know the privacy around that. Definitely do not put anything like NPI or PII into these tools. And I think some of the other panelists have thoughts on this area too.
Yeah, there are a lot of risks around using generative AI. Certainly, intellectual property is one of the big ones here, and it's a large concern for us here at Fidelity. We even have our people limited access to using generative AI, and that's one of the main reasons why. But with anybody using generative AI, there's certainly some things that you have to be aware of. Generative AI can advance bias. It can advance racism. There's a lot of fake news out there, as we know these days. We hear it in the news all the time, coming from all sides. So when using generative AI, you have to be even more aware of the outside noise and really do your homework. Before, when just searching the internet, you were kind of under the assumption that anything that you were analyzing and any results you came back were probably pretty much true. When using generative AI, you cannot make that assumption. You really have to put your thinking cap on and go over everything with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that you're not advancing fake news, racism, bias, anything like that. And I would also make the point that if you decide to use generative AI in your business, that everybody in your office understands the rules around it and understands the concerns and the risks. When I go out speaking on whether it's this or security, I always make the point that, hey, you're here listening to us, you're here listening to this panel, and you're going to get a lot of information here. But bring this information back to your offices and share it with everybody, making sure everybody is on the same page. Because if they're not, something bad could possibly happen. And remember, I said before, security becomes even more of an issue when you're using generative AI. So you have to think of those things. You have to think about things like violating copyright, which is something that can happen real easily when pulling this information off. And you want to make sure that with anything that you get out of generative AI, there's a human factor involved before you use that information.
Yeah, there have been some pretty examples. Oh, go ahead, Jason.
I was just going to share one other thing on that topic specifically, and I think the one thing that's important to keep in mind is if you think about generative AI, the reason why generative AI has as much information as it does, and that it can do some of the things that we do, that and sometimes make it feel and look like a human being. And I'm going to stay on that thread, even though it definitely is not human intelligence. One way to think of it is it's been trained on the internet. It's been trained on a large corpus, if not the entire internet, right? And everything on the internet is true. Everything on the internet is safe, right? So it's learned all of the things that are on the internet, good, bad, and ugly. And so one of the things I like to coach people on is it's kind of like you're walking through a university campus somewhere and you grab some random PhD student and ask them to be your AI, right? They're not your employee. You didn't select them. They've not been trained. They may or may not know something about the question you're asking them because you just don't know their personal level of intelligence, right? Maybe there's somebody like Dom who's worked in the industry forever and has family that's worked in the industry forever, and they're going to give you a really intelligent question on title insurance. Or then maybe you get somebody like Rick who's going to give you a very unintelligent answer about title insurance. You just don't know, right? And so the problem is we don't know how AI was trained. So you have to think about interacting with AI the same way you would sort of with a fairly intelligent random stranger, right? With a healthy degree of skepticism on what they answer and what they provide you back, and whatever biases they might have and whatever information they might have been trained on, they bring to the table as a human being. AI does the same thing, if that makes sense. I hope that's kind of the way I like to think about it as a safety check.
I think that's a great analogy, Jason. The one other thing I'll add is that the Gen AI will convincingly lie to you, and they have a pejorative term for this, and it's called hallucinations. And it's really it's just making stuff up when it doesn't know the answer. So there are some famous examples of like attorneys and others who have used generative AI tools and not checked the output of what the system gave and submitted it to a court. As Rick had mentioned, any output from an AI system, we recommend that humans in the loop, they review the output. At the end of the day, it's your ethical obligation and your regulatory obligation to make sure that the content of what you're sending out is compliant and true.
Yeah, and Gorkem, let me just add one more thing. I'm sorry. And by extension, I would have this discussion with any vendor that any title agent or attorney uses as well. If that vendor is using generative AI in their platform or their process, I would have that discussion with them as well to see what they're doing to protect not only themselves, but you as well.
So that takes us to our actual next question. And I think, Jason, you would be great to start answering this. How do you vet a vendor or a product or service? We talk about the technology itself and what it can do or cannot do, the risks of it. But in many cases, especially when we have a large majority of independent title and settlement agents, they are more likely to be buying something who claims to use or does use these technologies. When it's a black box, what are the questions one should be asking, or what should we be looking for?
Well, I'm going to add one thing on my thought, and then I'll hand it over to Rick, as Rick, you have a lot more expertise in this than I do, but this is to dovetail into the last question. And the last question, to take it all the way back, was if I'm taking a fidelity underwriting bulletin and putting it into one of these systems, am I violating some sort of copyright or something with fidelity? And this, it flows right into this next question, and I'll explain why. So if you're using the free version of these tools, right? So if you're going to Claude or Google or AI or OpenAI or Microsoft, and you're using the free version, they are able to run that product for free because they are taking anything you put into it and they are going to resell it, they are going to publish it, and they're going to learn from it. So if you're using a free version, you are selling them yourself, okay? So number one, don't use a free version with anything that you don't want the entire world to know and be available to you. There are professional versions of these products. Some of them are not very expensive, $20 or $30 a month. When you get into those versions of these products, now if you dive into the settings area and you get into the privacy thing, you will see they do hide it a little, of course, but you will see embedded inside of these products, you have the option to say, don't save my data, don't sell my data, don't learn on my data, don't train on my data. You're gonna wanna turn those all off. Most of the companies are gonna have that on by default, even on the professional versions. So don't start using it until you've turned on those safety features. Pay for a product. You will not be able to turn that off with a free product. If you're playing with a free product, feel free to play, but understand you're not. So again, back to that question about the bulletin, if you're putting the bulletin into a free product, you've just sold Fidelity's bulletin to Google, or you've just sold it to OpenAI as the way that commerce transaction just happened. If you set those settings off, you're not giving it to the company. You wouldn't, in theory, be violating anything that way. So number one, back to your question about vendors, Gorkem, what are you doing with my data? Are you going to take my data? Are you going to sell my data? Are you going to train on my data? Are you going to learn on my data? Or are you just using it to answer my question and then delete? First and foremost, are they being Facebook? Are they being Google? Are they trying to suck all of your information out and go resell it? Because that's their business model. That is how they make money. And then as you get further into other kinds of vendors other than these little chat tools, Rick, I'll hand it over to you. You've got a lot more experience working with all the different vendors in our space.
Yeah, and thanks, Jason. We ask those questions very specifically of all of our vendors, right? Because we want to make sure that they're not using our data. And I think a title agent needs to do the exact same thing. And I agree with Jason as well. Free version with anything, the same way that we would try to get a free version of a virus scan or malware scan, right? You're going to get what you pay for, and if you're paying nothing, that's what you're going to get. So you have to be very careful on that end. And with any product or platform, any vendor that's using generative AI, honestly, I would always suggest to run a pilot program with that and to test the functionality, to test the output, to make sure you're getting what you want, to make sure that it's giving you information to not put you in a bad situation, right? We're in a very competitive market, and we have to be concerned about those things, and especially in the slow market that we're in now. The other thing that we must be concerned of, and it's very important, is the fact that this industry as a whole is under tremendous pressure. From departments of insurance and regulators, CFPB, they're looking at this industry as, hey, is this something that's really necessary? Is this something that's giving the consumer what they want and getting the bang for their buck that they're paying for? And there's a lot of pressure that it's not, and we have to prove over and over again that we are an answer, that we are giving proper advice and proper protection to our customers. So we can't keep shooting ourselves in the foot by not, number one, protecting everybody in the transaction, and that includes the buyer, the seller, the real estate broker, the lender, the title agent, and even us underwriters. And two, we can't shoot ourselves in the foot by using generative AI like this and putting out possibly biased, false information or stuff that can get yourselves or this industry in trouble.
Yeah, so we talked about using underwriters' private information, but of course, all of us who are in the business also contain consumer information, which is even more privileged. So Dom or Jason or Rick, any thoughts about how best to protect that, aside from the safety guidelines that Jason, you rightfully pointed out? Are there other things we can do to be very careful of segregating that information out or using it responsibly?
Yeah. So one on that creativity thread and communication thread that Rick had mentioned that these systems are good at, if you want the system to like help you craft an email response to a query from a client or a customer or another stakeholder in a transaction, definitely do not put PII and NPI into one of these systems. You can say to ChatGPT or another tool, I have to respond to a particular email. Here's what I was thinking of saying, and help craft that response. But just don't copy and paste right from your Outlook or your Gmail a particular content, because that is going to send the PII and NPI over to the LLM.
And the thing that, I don't want to sound super Machiavellian when we talk about protecting data, like there's some overarching agenda to steal everybody's data or something like that, right? And it's not so much that, it's that the way these AI engines work is they learn on data. And what learning on data means is they absorb a bunch of data, and then they identify patterns about that data, and they associate one piece of data with another piece of data, and then they try and regurgitate an answer based upon patterns that they see in their neural network. And that's about as geeky as we're going to get. But a real life example is when they absorb this information, as it was mentioned, they tend to hallucinate. So what hallucinate just means is they repeat a pattern back to you that doesn't make any sense. It's not true. It's irrelevant as a result of a pattern. And I'm going to give you two quick examples, and this is helpful to understand. One of the real viral oopses from generative AI was Google's AI. Somebody asked it, the cheese keeps sliding off my pizza. How do I keep the cheese on my pizza? Right? Probably hoping for use less sauce or use a different kinds of cheese or something. The AI came back and said, you should use non-toxic glue. Now, I appreciate the AI saying non-toxic. That was sweet of it. But why on earth would it suggest glue? Well, it suggested glue for two reasons. One, if you think about the AI, it doesn't know. It's not intelligent. It understands patterns. So what it heard was, you have two things that you want to stick together, and they're not staying stuck together. When I think about patterns of things being stuck together, what do I also see a lot happening? Glue, right? So you're going to get a glue association. And then the second thing is, and this is where you think about bias, and it's a great example. AI was trained on the whole internet. One of the single largest threads ever on Reddit was a conversation about how to get cheese to stick on your pizza. I don't know why it went viral. Millions of people suggested their ideas, and the thread, as it does on Reddit, went sideways, and there were hundreds of thousands of people that had conversations about the best way to use glue to keep it on there without killing yourself. And it was a fun thread. As a human being, we know that's a fun thread. The AI just sees 100,000 people suggesting glue to hold cheese on pizza and thinks that's a pattern I'm going to share back with you. Okay. So that's what a hallucination is. It just sees patterns on the internet and repeats them back to you. So it doesn't always mean it's true. The reason why the personal data part is important is if I were to paste into an email, say I had a customer who was having trouble with a federal tax lien and they were really struggling with it, and I needed to write them an email helping them know how to go talk to the IRS about something on their property or whatnot. And I pasted everything in, and I said, Jason Nadeau, his social security number is 12345, and he lives at 123 Any Street, and here's all the information about him. Help me write this letter. Well, if you're using one of these free AIs that's going to learn from it, it's going to write me an answer, and then it's going to take that piece of information, just like the glue on pizza, and it's going to absorb it into its brain, and it's going to have a pattern. What it means then is when somebody else comes to that AI and says, what is Jason Nadeau's social security number? It's going to say, oh, I see a pattern. Jason, federal tax lien, social security number. Here's the social security number. It's not smart enough to know it shouldn't repeat back something it learned from something you gave it. It doesn't know that that's a bad thing to have learned and unlearn it, right? So that's why you have to be careful about the data going in. It's not some overall Machiavellian thing. It's just the AI is just not smart enough to know confidential, not confidential, smart, not smart. It just repeats back patterns it learns. Now, lots of companies are working on trying to help it get better at doing that, but right now it doesn't understand those kinds of distinctions in information.
Yeah. So it sounds like it even doesn't know the meaning of humor. maybe knows the
Correct.
meaning of the word, but not the context of it.
That's very, very true. And if you tell it to do something funny, for instance, it can definitely do something very off color if it finds a lot of patterns about that, right? Or humor that's not necessarily up to your standard. Gorkem, I'm going to pivot, if it's okay, into one of your questions and then punt it over to Dom. You
Sure.
kind of asked about privacy and all that. So I'm going to jump a little bit into the regulatory side of it real fast, because we're going to stay with risks and then kind of pivot to regulatory, I think is good. So there are, just like we've been seeing over the last couple of years, a lot of new laws coming with privacy and privacy related things. We are seeing a wave of proposed and actual legislation around AI use in business, and specifically AI use with consumers. I know Rick's been deeply involved with AI use with identity and identity proofing and fraud and such, which he's talked about and is really kind of our resident expert on that. So, but what you're seeing is you're seeing states put laws out that talk about and want to regulate the way AI is used. And I'm not going to get geeky on what they all mean, but I will tell you it's really pretty simple. Stay away from using any kind of private data. If you wouldn't write it on a billboard, don't write it into the AI. And you generally will stay clear of the privacy rules. The other one is, and Dom mentioned this earlier, the types of things you're asking it to help you with. Some of these, I think it was Colorado or maybe Utah, I can't remember which one, Rick, we were just working with, but they have this concept of a consequential decision. They want you to be careful about using AI with a consequential decision, the decision that could cause harm to a consumer, right? So don't ask the AI to help you price your policy. Don't ask it to set your pricing. Don't ask it to decide whether or not you should or shouldn't insure something. Don't make an underwriting decision off of it, right? Don't use it to make a clearance decision. Don't ask the AI, hey, should this letter be sufficient for this consumer? Because you just don't know. And what the regulators are worried about is, what if the AI has a glue pizza moment and you hand it a letter and say, is this sufficient clearance for Dominic? And it says, yes. And then you hand it one for Rick and it says no. And then all of a sudden you've got age discrimination, for instance, right? Not to pick any Rick. But what you've got to think about is the AI is making decisions based upon what it knows without you knowing what it knows. So it could inherently make a biased decision. The safest way to get away from running afoul of any of those regulations is use it for a lot of the really cool things we're talking about. Save the things that the result of which cause you to decline service or charge somebody more or charge somebody less or impact a consumer. Save that for next year or the year later when you get a little better with this AI.
And I think that's a great point, Jason. I do want to say that within the broader insurance world, insurers and others have been using machine learning, predictive analytics, the broader group of AI to help mitigate risk, predict fraud, and other areas. I think through this talk, you have seen that generative AI, that area that we're talking about, that's ChatGPT, is really good at creativity and really good at understanding words and patterns in words. What it's not as good at is predicting risk. It's just not built for that. And as Jason said, we shouldn't be using this particular tool to predict risk from a regulatory standpoint, but also it's not good at that and it's not built for that.
Right.
So
I think it's a really important point that it appears to be super intelligent, and the reality is it's not. What it is super creative, is really kind of the better way to think about it.
So I'm gonna ask Rick, because he obviously works with FNF's agents, independent agents, quite a bit. So Rick, what do you see in workplaces in terms of policies, guidelines, that people are making their employees follow or should make their employees follow so they don't fall into some of these traps, like the glue example, which is hilarious, but not really, or pricing loans or declining service to people. What should people be doing?
Well, I think this is so new that I don't believe a lot of title agents have actually put policies in place. And that's one of the reasons why hopefully many of our title agents are listening to this today. You have to put guardrails around this for all the things that Dom has been saying and Jason's been saying that I've been saying. generative AI, as I said, is creative, and it can do some great, great things for this industry. But at the same time, when I give my presentations on AI, I actually spend more time on the risks and the problems it could cause. So what I would do before allowing anybody to use generative AI is to put these guardrails in place, to talk about the things that we've talked about on this call, put them in writing, make sure everybody knows and understands their roles and responsibilities when it comes to using generative AI. Just as everybody has to understand their roles and responsibilities when it comes to security. It doesn't matter who you are in a title agent's office, everybody has those same responsibilities. So what I would suggest to any title agent or attorney is to sit down, decide what it is that you want to do, decide what it is you want to accomplish, decide what platform it is you want to use, and then put the guardrails around it and make sure everybody understands. And like I said, I would put that in writing, and I would check on a regular basis that everybody is following those rules. Because one slip up, as Dom talked about, could be very hurtful when it comes to a monetary problem or a reputational problem.
Dom, what are your thoughts? And we have a question from the audience that kind of ties into this. I want to weave that into. Somebody's asking, is there a title lending escrow set of best practices for artificial intelligence and access to possible NPI? What is their guidance? Or is somebody working on something?
So that's a great point. I don't know that I've seen that within the industry, but it is a good area for best practice creation. And
So,
I think, and in regards to Rick's point, I think he nailed it. Those are
Absolutely.
great. Educating folks and having a policy. It's a great tool, just like we learned that Google was a great tool and we had to learn to use Google appropriately. You wouldn't ask Google an underwriting decision or a risk-based decision. And so we have to educate folks that this is just another tool and how to best use it.
Yeah, and I have not seen, I think, so Rick nailed it. He exactly right, the right approach, 100%. I do think it would be great if ALTA started thinking about some best practices around this. I haven't seen any. That doesn't mean they're not, so I don't want to leap to they're not doing something else. I haven't.
Jason, it's actually on our agenda that I'm running at the Executive Best Practices Committee at Alta next week.
That's awesome.
Fantastic. That's great. The other thing I'm going to suggest, and this is fun, is when you sign up for one of these AI tools, ask it. While we were sitting here, I just went to the one that we use within our company, the Microsoft product, and asked it. And I said, I am a manager of a title agent, and I need a best practices policy for use of generative AI with my employees. Can you give me some suggestions? And it gave me some really good real life suggestions around possible policies and do's and don'ts and that sort of thing. That can get you started in a company with helping frame up what you want that policy to look like that you can then distribute to your employees and ask them to follow.
So it didn't tell you to put your credit card here and initial there? No?
It asked me for my social security number first, but I thought that was fine. So
Perfect.
I think it's a great point, Jason. I think if folks walk away with this with one thing is to think of Gen AI as another tool and think of it maybe as you would normally Google something, maybe go to Gen AI to brainstorm ideas like Jason just mentioned. And don't just take what it regurgitates out as the word of law, but as a starting point to refine your thoughts on this particular topic.
Yeah, and one thing I would share, this isn't really on any of our topics, Gorkem, but just a tip. One of the major paradigm changes with these AIs, if you were to do what I just did and go to one of them and say, hey, help me write this, Google is kind of a one-shot thing, right? We're used to going to Google and you would type AI policy for small company or something, and then you start combing through the list. And if it wasn't right, you didn't go, hey, Google, I didn't like any of those choices, give me more. You had to come up with new keywords to search on. Remember, generative AI is a conversation. As long as you've got all that open until you hit new conversation, it knows what you're talking about. So I just did what I said, which said, Google, help me write some policies. it was a little formal in my opinion. You can go right back to it and say, could you focus a little more on customer data and be a little less formal? And then it will rewrite it and do it again, and it'll do it again. So it's a conversational interaction, whereas Google was more of a one-shot interaction. So just a tip while you're thinking about that, it's a little bit different way to think about looking for information.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jason. The one other thing I'll add is that in a Google world, we were taught to like use as few keywords as possible, so that, and then we would add keywords when we wanted to narrow. Like you in your example, you might start with generative AI policy, and then you'd see like enterprise stuff, and you'd say for small business, and that would help you narrow it down. These systems actually give better results when you give them more context. As Jason said, something to the likes of act as a manager of a title agency in Texas who's wants to encourage the use of generative AI safely within their organization. Write me some guidelines to do so for your escrow officers and title officers. That additional context helps it give you a better answer. And you'll find through use, you'll learn like how to, this is called how to prompt the system, and you'll learn how to prompt the system to get the best results. And couple that with Jason's point of iterating on the response and asking it to refine the response.
And Dom just said something really important to think about is he included in his example, I'm in Texas, right? A title agent in Texas. Do that. That's important as you're doing this sort of thing, because if you were to ask it for a policy, for instance, to help you with ideas on policy, and you're in California, California privacy laws look very different than Mississippi privacy laws, right? So if you were to say, I'm in California, help me do it, it's going to suggest adjustments to your policy based upon California law that it knows versus Mississippi law. And you don't necessarily want to have that all blend. So again, more information, the better. In Google, we would have said, help me write a policy. And you have scrolled by and been like, well, that one's for California title. California is way different than the rest of the world. I'm not picking California. And you would have selected that. Tell the AI that. It will then select more appropriate information for you if you give it more information.
And then after you start here, put the privacy professional in the loop to actually review what you got.
Right, that's 100%. Yep.
So as we're coming kind of close to the top of the hour, I want to ask you, we talked about what is happening now, a couple of things, exciting things in the lab that you talked about, but at the macro scale, as you kind of zoom out a little bit, what trends are you seeing in the next 2 to 3 years in use of these technologies?
Yeah, I think
I'll start with Dom. How about, let's pick on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I think what we'll see in the broader world and also in our real estate world is that we will have these powerful assistants that have access to our system data, our policies and procedures, and be able to respond to our queries in an intelligent fashion that is grounded in our system data and our policies and procedures, and be able to serve this up in a way that allows the licensed escrow officer or title officer to review the output and confirm that it's accurate and not hallucinating, so that we can all do our jobs faster, better, quicker, and respond to the needs of the consumer. And this is not just going to be in real estate. It's going to be on Google, on your Android phone, and on iPhone, on your iOS device. Is that?
Yep, that's great. And Rick, what do you think?
Well, putting my IT hat on, I think the greatest advancement and advantage of AI is going to be on the security front, right? Okay. As fighting security, over the years, it's always been the good guys have always been one step behind the bad guys. And what I'm anticipating is, and I'm hopeful for this, is the good guys using AI will be able to stay in front of the bad guys.
Jason, what are your thoughts?
Mine's a little more boring than the two of these guys, but I think the big paradigm change with AI for our business is going to be around the way we work with documents and the way we interact with documents. And the reason I say that is we've been using machine learning. Our industry's been using AI. A lot of us don't necessarily know it, but we've been using it for 10, 15 years now. But it was the kind of AI where if you wanted it to say, be able to recognize a certain type of document from the courthouse or out of a title plant or a certain type of document in escrow, you had to give it hundreds of examples of what that document would look like so that it could learn that document. That was very problematic in the real estate world because we have thousands of documents. The documents look different from different lending institutions and different counties in different states. The variations were so immense that it almost always took a human being to look at it and go, oh yeah, that's a letter from the HOA, right? Or, oh, that's a deed. Human beings could tell, but the AI was really bad at it because there were so many patterns. We're starting to learn that this new AI is actually quite good at recognizing what documents are and how to find information on these documents, more like a human did than the old AI used to do. And if you think about it, our industry still, we're a document-driven industry. We've got away from a lot of paper, but we still use a lot of documents. We use documents to communicate data. We use documents to convey land. We use documents for lots of things. I have a vision in my head of an AI assistant, like Dom said, and like Rick said, I'll try and string this all together, but I have this vision of, I get an email in as a closer or an escrow officer, and it's got an attachment to it. And my email is smart enough to look at it, read it, open it, and go, this is an HOA letter on 123 Any Street. And I see in SoftPro, you have a transaction on 123 Any Street. I've scanned it for viruses. I've determined that based upon your task list in SoftPro, you're looking for an HOA letter. This is that HOA letter. I'm going to extract the fields off of it, update SoftPro, check that box off, and file it in my document system. We could have never done that before because there are 147,000 HOAs in the country and they all write different letters, right? Yep. So it always had to be a human being doing it. I think that AI can do these types of things for us in the next couple of years because of its ability to interact with documents. So I think that's where I hope it's going. Let me put it that way. I don't know if I'd say I think it's going there. That's where I'm hoping it's going.
So. Yeah, I'm hoping it's going the same place. It is very astonishing, some of the things you can do, because the two things, large language models did, they democratized AI. Anybody can do it, right?
Absolutely.
At the cost, of course, and paying attention to these things we talked about, the guardrails. And it also is really good at understanding documents and text. And that's power in our hands, which makes it very exciting, with cautious optimism, of course. So we have a couple minutes left. I'm going to ask each of you, and I'll start with Jason, to tell our audience what to do next in their business once they go back. What should they do to get familiar with this technology or use it for their business?
I'm probably going to steal everybody else's answer, but pick one of them. Go to Microsoft Copilot, go to ChatGPT, go to Anthropic Claude, sign up for the $20 a month version of it or something on your computer, and start using it. Start playing with it. When you were going to go Google something, use this instead. When you were going to try and research something, use this instead, and just start getting a feel for how to use it and whatnot till you get comfortable. Then you can actually start using it more on business stuff. So.
And you'll provide referral codes to the audience so you get a cut?
Yeah, everybody gets a discount. Absolutely. Yes.
Wonderful. That's awesome. It's not going to happen, but we do have a giveaway. Dom, what do you think?
I think what Jason suggested and what Rick had suggested in regards to policies earlier are great starts. What I want folks to also remember is that this is not a place to replace your professional judgment. This is just a starting point. It's we're not trying to replace escrow officers or title agents. It's really just a starting point for how that escrow officer or that title officer can respond to a query, brainstorm ideas on how to market or other things.
Yeah. And last but not least, Mr. Diamond.
Yeah, well, it's hard to top that. I mean, I would just say practice, practice, practice. One of the things that Jason brought up is this is conversational. And the more you practice with it, the more you understand and figure out how it wants to communicate with you and how it wants to receive kind of those questions to give you the output that you want. And that takes some time. I've had to spend some real time understanding kind of how that interaction works. And, just as a reminder, for effective, AI, generative AI usage, you really got to remember it requires quality data of what you're doing with it and asking it quality questions, and also having the human interaction. I mean, if I had to leave this with one thing, it's that.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Dom, Jason, and Rick for joining us and sharing your insights and expertise with us. And in closing, I just want to thank all of our audience members for joining us with this episode 58 of Save You a Seat. This is something we do, as you know, on I think a monthly frequency. Ellen and Leslie organized this for us and for you, and we really appreciate their efforts. A recording of this meeting will be available on our blog in about a couple of weeks after we run it through some AI, probably. I don't know, but you'll need to get it ready. Yep. And don't forget that we have a giveaway to the next edition of SPUG, SoftPro User Group, in April in Nashville, Tennessee. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.